real quick intro for myself. Megan Neff, I'm Director of Partner Success on our corporate partnerships team at Rev1. Really excited to talk with the Redi team and talk with you and share their story. They are a very great team and have been a perfect example of a company that has gone through Rev1 resources from start to, well, continuing on. So I'm the board observer with Redi, and yeah, excited to get started. So before we get into the meaty questions, would love to have you both introduce yourselves, and then, if you can, give your version of a Redi elevator pitch.
Awesome. Hey, everybody. I'm Luke Buchanan. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Redi Health. So I'll start with the elevator pitch. So Redi is a health management platform that helps patients get access to high-cost pharmaceutical products through support offered by the manufacturers of those medications. My background is in tech, adjacent to pharmaceutical manufacturers. I started right out of college at a company called Cover My Meds, which I'm sure all of you are very familiar with. That company grew very quickly, and I had a lot of opportunities there to cut my teeth as it related to learning the industry and learning where this problem was eventually going to evolve into what Redi was solving. So in 2021, I left that company along with some other people from that company and Jaimin to start Redi.
Hey everyone, good morning. My name is Jaimin Gandhi. I'm the co-founder and CTO at Redi. It's pretty surreal for me to be back here because my tech career actually started in this building. I graduated from Tech Elevator back in 2017, so a long time ago. But that's really where I kicked off my entryway into tech and programming and coding. So I was at JP Morgan at that time, and they actually had a pretty cool program where they took business-facing folks and taught them how to code. And then we went back to Chase and became programmers, which was really, really awesome. After Chase, I spent 2.5 years at Beam Dental, which is now called Beam Benefits in product. So I worked on a wide variety of things, such as integrations and system design, as well as just product in general. And then as Luke mentioned, in 2021, he and I both left, along with our other two co-founders, Nate and Kyle, to found Redi. So that's my story. From an elevator pitch perspective, Redi builds patient support programs for patients that have chronic disease. Looking forward to chatting today.
Thank you both. So obviously it's 2024. 2021 was inception. Where you are today is a bit different from where you started. So tell us a little bit about that journey. Luke, if you, everyone in the audience, Luke was recently on a podcast called That Worked. During that podcast, you talked a little bit about going big. So if you can, share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. That was in reference to your first customers. And so our first customers were not pilot customers. They were just full-on contracts, just priced at the price we thought should be the full price for a 3-year term. We didn't come in and say, we're a small startup, we want to try something, will you do it for 3 months for free with us? We went big, but I'll get into that in a bit. The beginning of Redi started with Jaimin and I going through the customer learning lab with Rev1. We were not an incorporated company at that time. We really just had an idea, and we didn't know a single person in the venture capital space, but we knew we wanted to raise formal institutional funding like that. And so we thought that was the best pathway. And admittedly, we were like, well, if we do customer learning lab, then Rev1's going to invest in us. And that was unfortunately a very naive understanding of how venture works. Fortunately, Rev1 got us to a place where it didn't matter that that's what we thought. They educated us to the point where we knew that that was not correct, but it started us on a trajectory that eventually led to our original lead investor and ultimately refined the early approach of our idea to be something that was very attractive to the venture market. And that's continued throughout our partnership with Rev1. But in those early days, we didn't really know exactly what we were doing. We had the idea of the problem we were solving, but we didn't have any real data on how to solve it. And so this place really helped us refine that down. In the very early days when we first started, the thing that we were really trying to do is just get the support into patients' hands. We didn't have a distribution strategy. We didn't really have great design around our product. We just knew that we wanted to build a very good product. And we had good partnerships in the pharma space already to kind of go understand whether that was going to be an acceptable approach to it. And it turned out that it was. And we got a lot of good feedback, and we really put that into the product and continued to build it, ultimately leading to the feedback on, you need to bring me patients. So we went out and built a vast network of partners to bring patients into the platform on behalf of pharmaceutical manufacturers. And that's really created the secret sauce that we have through Redi. So early on, product focus didn't really have a really good blueprint as to what to do, but we knew that we had a problem that we wanted to solve. And we weren't building a platform and then trying to find a problem to solve with it. We always kept the problem in mind and knew that we needed to build toward that. And so today, it's the same problem we're solving. We just take a very different approach in terms of the starting point. We want Redi to be, as opposed to just something that's in the patient's hands on behalf of a pharmaceutical manufacturer, what it's evolved into from the very beginning is that we want Redi to be pushed to the patient and pull the patient into that ecosystem at every point in the patient journey. The point when you're written a prescription, the point you go to the pharmacy, the point when you're trying to refill your medication, you cannot. Redi is there at every single step. So from beginning to now, very, very different evolution.
When we were prepping for this, you guys, you both bring really interesting perspectives because you also have the business as well as the tech side. Selling into large pharmaceutical companies is very nuanced. Each one has, their own specific strategic imperatives. So talk a little bit about, again, with the theme of those early days, how did you approach selling into them, having those conversations, but then on your own internal side, approaching them from a client perspective, but making sure that you can implement effectively on the tech end?
Yes, I can give the tech side. Early on, we were just building anything and everything to get the deal done, to get the pitch and the contract through, which I think it's an approach that most startups take, right? You want to listen to the market to some extent and build according to what the market tells you. I think as we've evolved, we've kind of taken an approach where we can be seen as consultants as well as a provider of a service to our clients. As Megan mentioned, pharma is very nuanced, depending on the therapeutic area, the way the medication's distributed, even, of course, the patient profile. The strategy can be very, very different, which sometimes requires your product to be interpreted very, very differently. But that doesn't necessarily mean you need to recreate the wheel every single time you get a deal done. Early on, that's definitely the approach we took because it was the easiest to brute force our way into it, similar to how you program, certain things or design certain things. You just try to get it done, and then you refactor and reinvent as you go. But over the last, I would say, 12 to 18 months, we've really taken a programmatic and a really scalable approach to how we can turn on programs for different therapeutic areas, different types of clients, different types of patient profiles, by investing in internal tools and internal resources and leveling up, of course, our people to allow us to scale in an effective way.
Yeah, and just adding on to that and taking it a little bit into the sales aspect of things. When we took a look at pharma, we knew from our time at Cover My Meds that software had not been injected into this space. And so it was like, wow, this area is ripe to try and disrupt or at least augment with software. But we also stopped to ask when we were talking about how we build the product as to, okay, why does SaaS not survive in this ecosystem? Why does it die, or why can't it exist already? Because it's virtually everywhere else, so if it's not in the pharmaceutical space, why is that? And it was exactly the things that Jaimin just said. There's a very different approach for every manufacturer that you need. They all want something special built, so the principles of SaaS, which is don't do one-offs, right? Keep things very consistent, ensure that what you're building, right, is scalable. You don't want to, put a lot of customizations in because that's going to slow down the scalability of the product. That doesn't survive in pharma because everybody has a different compliance opinion. Every medication has different needs. It treats a different therapeutic area. And every patient population has a certain level of literacy to where they even understand how to use a product like this. So when, Jaimin, Kyle, Nate, and myself kind of sat down, okay, how do we make sure we truly can disrupt this space? We thought, what level do we need to build our scalability so it can survive in such a variable environment like this? And so, you know, Jaimin has really taken the helm on that and has constructed an internal tool we call Builder here. And so I'll just share a stat with you. Our first program, which we went big on, took 90 days to build. It was like a true, right, chop shop kind of deal. But we build everything in a way that it can just be turned on for somebody else and sort of re-white labeled with the same tech. And so our most recent program, we stood up in 8 hours. And it was very, very similar to that first one. So building in a way where you can respect the variability of pharma is how you create something that is similar to SaaS. We call it SaaS, software as a healthcare service. Similar to SaaS, but not quite. That's really where the approach that we've taken and that Jaimin has really, you know, put the rocket fuel into the rocket, so to speak, has really put us in a position to thrive in this space where others have not been able to.
That's a really interesting point, and not to jump down the line, but you're kind of touching on team, specifically the tech team. So one of the things, Jaimin, that you mentioned was the evolving sales cycle means evolving products, and that doesn't always mean that the products need to be evolving externally, but it's the internal efficiencies that are super important. So again, you're multiple years in at this point. Can you just speak to, maybe in addition to what Luke shared, how you approach that tech build and, you know, how you leverage the team that you have to gain those efficiencies?
Yeah, definitely. I think Redi is very, very blessed to have some of the best product managers, the best engineers that I've ever worked with that take change very, very lightly. In tech, change, especially immediate change, is pushed back on very, very aggressively, but you know, we don't have that type of culture or that type of team composition. Anytime we bring in a deal, we kind of break it down to a singular component. Is it a new text field? Is it a new API? Is it a new integration? Do we plan on doing this again? Do we plan on actually incorporating it into our sales cycle, into our pitch, into how we deliver value for patients again? So every deal, per se, goes through some sort of deal review with our implementation team, our sales team, as well as our product engineering team. At a lot of organizations, especially larger ones, when a new idea or a new build comes in or a new opportunity, it's thrown across the fence to the engineering team and the product team, and they're forced to figure it out on their own. Redi, which again we're very, very blessed to have, we have very open lines of communication as to why Redi decided to pursue a deal. What is the patient profile? What is the therapeutic area? Why is it important for the manufacturer to purchase a service like Redi? Those sorts of things are translated down to the engineering level. That way everyone in the organization is in the loop on why we've chosen to do a certain thing, even if that means changing some sort of part of our architecture, some sort of part of our system design. So once that component has been created once, it's built in a way that we can use it and repurpose it across multiple programs. So if we're building some sort of copay solution, the ins and outs and the skeleton of that copay solution can be reprogrammed in a way that can meet the needs of the next manufacturer or the next brand. So everything really starts with that open line of communication, that deal breakdown, and then how those components can actually translate to multiple solutions in the future.
So to me, it really sounds like you are trying to be, again, as efficient as possible, but maybe avoiding some of the pitfalls that other small early stage companies have seen in the past. One, from a tech build perspective, but then also, you know, being client facing. So Luke, maybe this question is for you, and Jaimin would love your thoughts. You recently had shared that you specifically wanted to avoid calling Redi a startup or small company when you're, you know, we're selling to clients, being very client facing. So can you tell the group a little bit about that strategy?
Yeah, I think it largely depends on the industry that you're in. But in pharma, if you go tell them that you're a small company that's brand new, they're going to treat you like a small company that's brand new. That means you've lost all your negotiating power. That means they may not actually consider you because there's risk in their very high compliance environment that you're going to default on your, you know, loans or your investments or whatever, and you're going to go under. And they even oftentimes will put you through like financial analysis in order to even partner with you to understand the percentage at which you may go under in the next 18 months. They're so risk adverse. Startup is inherently something that is high risk and innovative. Depending on your industry, they're going to focus on one of those two pillars more than the other. If your industry focuses on startup means risk, don't say you're a startup. If they think startup means innovation, then you can focus on it. We should not do that. And I might recommend that you never do. It all depends on how the behavior you are as an organization. If you're treating people like actual employees, if you have good corporate governance, if you're approaching your product in a really programmatic way, and you have all the certifications related to security, then you're a company. You might be small, but it really doesn't matter. If you can produce value for your customer and your product is working, your size doesn't matter. So I'm always very against actually going into the commercialization setting and being like, we're a startup. It doesn't really matter. If your product is better, if it truly is better, if it is differentiated, none of that will matter. It will just muddy the waters as it relates to the pure value that you can provide your customer.
Yeah, to add on to that, the good thing about being a startup in pharma is we can react very, very quickly to things that change that our clients need us to react to, that no other vendor, no other hub, no other client IT team can react as quickly as Redi can. To Luke's point, when we brand ourselves as a startup or a small organization, that inherently means that we're not compliant or we're not as secure with patient data, that we're not as compliant with HIPAA regulations, but that's just not the case, right? We've always built Redi with the patient in mind, with this pharma-focused lens in mind. So from day one, we started pursuing the accreditations that we need to be compliant, designing our system architecture in a way that will allow us to be compliant. But with all that being said, we can react to changes and react to certain things in a very, very quick manner. Or oftentimes we're waiting on the vendors that we work with that have partnered with pharma for the program to send us information, to send us data, to send us the next spec that we need to iterate on the program. So I think there is both a good thing about being branded as a startup, but also a downside as well. So.
And it also sounds like you are in a position now, as you continue to grow and learn, you can move from react to being proactive and plan based on the different scenarios you're seeing on companies, medications, things like that. But obviously, to be proactive, you have to have a very great team. Which I will say you guys have been super intentional, just looking outside in with the hires, but let's just start with the founding team. You guys are, you have several founders, which perhaps might be a bit unique, but at least from what you've communicated and what I think we've seen is that that's been a real asset for you guys. So if you can just speak a little bit to the multiple founders.
Yeah, so we get asked about this a lot because we have 4 founders, and generally you see 1 or 2, maybe 3, but not really 4. And I wouldn't say that when we started we were like, hey, we really need 4 people to start this. It just kind of made sense. And so what I would say is, right, the way in which the founders kind of came together was there are things that we need to go to market, and we need experts that are really bought in order to do this. And we need to make sure that there's very little overlap across those individuals. So we needed tech, right? We needed data, we needed commercialization and sales, and we needed clinical. Those are the 4 pillars we thought we needed in order to make our product and our approach to the market really good. And so we thought, why not have those at the very beginning of the company so it can shape the overall vision and continue to mold it? So that's exactly what we did. Jaimin is tech, I am data. We're all leadership, right? We all take that culture approach. Nate is commercialization and sales, and Kyle Grimslid is clinical and strategy. And so that just gave us the ability. We certainly have skills that overlap with one another, and that's helpful to create support. But the founding team in particular is really one that stood up, I think, this really important foundation because we identified the needs of the business from the very beginning. And we ensured that we found people that really fit that need. Now, there's a lot of downsides to having multiple founders. But I think by and large, there are far more upsides. I mean, having more people around the table that can kind of commiserate with what it's like to be in a high-growth startup, anybody who's done it, like having support around the table is the most important thing. And so I value that so much.
It also makes for a way better group chat to have 4 guys in it than just a couple, so that's always fun too.
So true. The memes are great.
So founders aside, what was your first hire outside of the founding team, and how have you approached hiring since then?
Yeah, definitely. A few of our first hires were on the engineering side as well as the client success and the data side, right? So selling into pharma, not only do you need to build a good product, but you need to maintain it, you need to defend it, which requires us to hire the best in the business in terms of client success and data. In terms of what we look for in a founding team, I think what we looked for back then is the same thing that we look for now, right? There's an easy answer and one that's not as straightforward. The easy answer is if your company has some sort of skill gap, go ahead and hire for it. If it's data, go ahead and hire a data analyst. If it's product design, go ahead and hire a product designer. I think the thing to unpack during interviews that makes hiring pretty complex when you're at a startup is how do you quantify those things that truly make startups unique? First and foremost is how do you find individuals that can stomach the emotional roller coaster of working at a startup, right? You're going to have your absolute best days at Redi or at a early company, and you're also going to have your absolute worst days. How do you find individuals that can stomach those ebbs and flows, that can go through those exercises with you, and still not lose faith in the mission, right? It's really hard to interview for, it's really hard to unpack, but I think we've done a good job of instilling a pretty solid interview practice where after we've gotten past the technical nuances of the role, we really focus on them as an individual and how they can actually stomach those ups and downs. And then secondly, we need to look for folks that can be proactive, right? Redi is still in its early days, right? I think the company's really accelerated over the last 12 to 18 months, but we don't have the luxury of hiring someone that's responsible for documentation or instilling a process. That should naturally come with the role. So when we're looking for early employees or even employees that we're hiring now, we really need to look at who is proactive in their job, who would be willing to wear multiple hats and actually do things that might potentially be outside of their scope of responsibility.
Yeah, just to add, I think I just want to index on trying to find individuals who can handle the startup environment. Something we always say is that in startup, there's no such thing as a purely good day, but there is such thing as a purely bad day. So you need people who can not just kind of handle that, but really thrive in it and use it as fuel to try and push forward. So individuals who like to overcome obstacles, not individuals who only like to be on the success path. It's an important thing to look for. How you get it out of interviews, I think that depends on you and your team and how you interview. I don't have the answer for that. I think we've kind of figured it out. But that is probably the most important thing very early on, because you can bring someone with great talent into the organization that has done a lot in their past. But if they can't do it in a company of 8 people, then it doesn't matter. You've wasted your time.
I like that. Can they stomach it? I don't know how you measure that, but it seems like you guys have done a good job. Speaking of persevering, you obviously have grown. We'll get into this in a second. You've been able to raise funds, go through different series. How have your roles changed as a result of that growth, and maybe even at the team level? How have just general expectations changed as you've grown as a company?
Do you want to start? Okay, all right, I can do it. So the CEO role, I'll start with myself, is I don't know, sometimes from the outside, I think people think that you're like, sitting in an ivory tower and having all these ideas. And at an early stage startup, it's just sort of the chief everything officer kind of, but also nothing officer at the same time. It's whatever kind of needs to be done. And that can be very unclear sometimes. Early on, it was very much individual contributor on whatever needed to be done. And everybody kind of did that. Each founder and early employee had their swim lane of what they were kind of working in, but something weird would come up that we need to do, and it was my role and the other founders to jump in and figure out who needs to do it, how it needs to get done. As we've matured, that's still a major portion of it, but it becomes a little bit more of a focus on strategically how we run the organization in terms of getting the right people aligned to the right initiatives, but still with very little resources. So rather than there being no resources and I having to jump in to try and fill that gap, we have to understand how with very little resources do we achieve what we need to get to the next stage. And so my role, I feel like, has changed drastically in that the individual contribution hasn't gone away, it's shifted into sort of other things, but now it's a balance of thinking about what's next versus focusing on what's now. And that's a difficult thing to do. Luckily, I have my co-founders around me that oftentimes are like, hey, you're looking in the wrong place, a little slap in the right direction. So that's always really helpful. But as it relates to team, it's sort of that same vein. There should never be a disconnect, I think, from the leadership of the organization with how the team feels that they're properly aligned. That sounds very cliche and easy to put into motion, but oftentimes, if you're not careful, the technical side of the organization may have certain individual goals that for some reason are conflicting with the commercialization side of the organization. You have to be very, very careful to make sure that even at a granular level, that doesn't happen. And so a lot of times I think our roles have changed in that we're just making sure that everybody's focusing on the right things as it relates to the overall vision, while still trying to individually contribute in virtually every aspect of the business.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I would say that individual contribution still remains a gigantic part of each one of our roles. And I know Nate and Kyle would probably attest to this too. That shouldn't go away anytime soon. Regardless if we're going to go raise the Series C or D, I think a large part of our job still needs to be fundamentally ingrained in the operations of the business, how we deliver our products, how it's sold. Over the last, again, 12 to 18 months, I would say Luke and mine, as well as Nate and Kyle's roles, have become way more strategic. They have become way more about people management and what the business may need from us 6 months from now versus 6 days from now. But there is still that level of, what are we building? Are we building the right things? How do we test this one new feature for a client? All of us are still hopping on client calls. I'm still hopping into, code reviews, design reviews, product strategy sessions. So none of that really has fundamentally changed. If anything, it's accelerated because we've brought on just such smart people that helps us move the ball forward in a much more quicker fashion than when it was just the 4 of us in a room. But yeah, I don't see that individual contributor part going away anytime soon, nor do I think, I wanted to.
You mentioned this a little bit, but let's talk raising money. So since 2021, you've raised seed, Series A, and Series B. And you guys, I'm sure, can provide a little bit more color, but raising capital in the Midwest is extremely different from raising capital on the coast. So tell us a little bit about that process, how you've approached it, and like any kind of words of wisdom or advice you have for any other founders, startups going through that process.
Yeah, so raising money is, it's fun. It's the least fun thing you're gonna do though. So I really do mean that. I think we've all enjoyed going through the process of raising money. It's a lot of no, like a lot of no. But that's okay. Once you get the expectation of, you can feel it out in the first 5 minutes whether someone's gonna be interested or not. But you become very tailored in terms of the craft of pitching your product. You become very good at telling the story of your organization. And when you hire good people and you have a good product, it starts to really tell itself, and you just have to make sure you're reflecting it properly. Early on, so definitely our seed, Series A, seed stage, you could classify it as pre-seed even. It was very, very small, and we were just focused on trying to get initial dollars in the door to, kind of kick off and get off the ground. And this is where the words of wisdom, I think, come in. The thing that I can offer everybody here is, in a startup, however much money you think it takes, however much time you think it takes, double that at minimum. Because in your mind, you're probably going to be like, I'm now a small company. I can move really fast. I'm very agile. I say this all the time. You can only move as fast as your fastest customer. So the market does not speed up because you can run faster, right? You're just now caught in a group of individuals moving slower than you, and you have to figure out how to get ahead of that. So you need to raise more money than you think. Because things are going to take longer than you think. That's really, really important. As we got into our Series A, it kind of shifted from telling just the story of Redi and what we think it can do to having some proof points as to how the market is receiving it. That's where going big really played to our favor. We were asked during raising our Series A, which was a small A as well, hey, what pilots do you have in place? Do you have any data from those? And instead we were like, we have actual contracts. So that was an important step that made that a little bit easier. We also weren't raising $25 million for our Series A. We were raising like 3.7. So as I just said, raise more than what you think you need, only also raise what you think you need. Just have a better idea of what that is. When we got to our Series B, we had a lot of opportunity, and this is recent, we did this in January. We had a lot of opportunity to expand into different areas of distribution for patients, of building out this network. We had more pharmaceutical manufacturers interested. a lot of big deals that we frankly weren't really prepared to handle at that exact moment, but that's what venture capital is for. So companies ran by good founders that understand venture capital, know when to bring the money in so they can accelerate and meet the needs of the customer in the market. That was a $14 million round. That was much more than our Series A, but still a reasonable B. And so I love the fact that we've raised just under 20 million at Series B. I think it's a good thing, right? Value should be the focus, not valuation. And that's something that got flipped in recent years. And so we're really focused on creating as much value as possible with as little as capital as possible, which is an important thing for your future, your optionality, and ensuring that everybody has a good outcome when you finally do have that good outcome.
Just to touch on the Midwest thing a little bit. So I don't think there's a better place to raise venture dollars than the Midwest, and I genuinely mean that. This isn't an ad for Rev1, of course, but we have this no asshole rule at Redi when we hire new folks, and we take that same approach to investors and like who we decide for our board. We genuinely have a very, very supportive and a very, very collaborative group of individuals who have not only given us money and time, but they've also given us the resources and the trust and the comfort that we need to actually execute on our business. A lot of companies tend to fall apart because they have a really shitty board and they have really terrible investors who only look out for P&Ls and balance sheets. Redi, thankfully, doesn't have that. You know, Redi has had several bad days, and we've shared those bad days with our investors, but you know, they've told us just to figure it out, go to the next step, and they're going to be here every step of the way. And if we need a bridge loan or something else from an investment perspective, they're going to be ready to give us that. So I mean it when I say I think that the Midwest is an absolute phenomenal place to raise venture dollars because you get a certain type of individual along with those dollars as well, which has been great.
Sorry, that's a good point, Jaimin. You're not just marrying the money, right? You're marrying the investors. That's really important. That can make or break a company. So that's a good point, Jaimin. Thank you.
Value creation, not valuation. I think wherever our investment team is in the room, that's music to their ears, and maybe any other investor in the room. And I think it's fair to say you do not have the mentality of grow at all costs.
Yeah, I mean, we've rejected that outright from the very beginning. I mean, it's just so easy to get over your skis. Things can change so quick in startup, right? So everything can be looking really, really good, and you're like, you know what, I think we need to double the organization because it's going to accelerate everything, or we're going to alleviate everybody on the team from this overworked burn that we're creating. But ultimately, you want to try and do as much with as little as possible and keep that going as long as possible. So grow at all costs oftentimes means like hire at all costs because you bring more people in and that's going to accelerate more sales and that kind of thing. And that's just not true. More than that, you need to focus on the strategy in which you're approaching the market. And very likely out of that, you'll be like, maybe we need to hire 1 or 2 additional people as opposed to 10 to 15. So grow at all costs, not a good thing. That's why things in 2021 and 2022 got all zerped out and flipped around. Whereas now, things are returning back to maybe how they should be, which is how do you build a business that is on a path to good fundamentals? Doesn't have to be profitable right away, but it needs to show a good path to good fundamentals.
So let's talk about the future a little bit. So you spoke about how you went big early on, learning the nuances of pharma, building a team. How do you guys, and how frequently do you guys think about the future, where you want to see Redi going, and yeah, the strategy around that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say almost every hour of every day, for sure. I think for what it's worth, there's a balance between execution and vision. A lot of your company is made just in the daily grind, that next line of code, that next cold call, that next email. So it's hard, or it's easy to get swept up in the grand scheme of things, that the grand vision of what Redi will become 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now. But again, so much of the company has been made just at the ground level and continues to be made daily. Just from a vision perspective of the next 2 to 3 years, I think there are 2 things that I personally look for when we think about what Redi would look like in the future. First is market leadership, right? In the pharma space, there are a bunch of different vendors that service the patient support and the market access ecosystem. A bunch of different vendors tends to mean a very complicated and a very confusing patient experience, right? Which is exactly what Redi is trying to solve for. So when we think of what Redi will become over the next couple of years, really it's that brand and that market leader for market access and patient support, allowing patients to not only get access to their medications, but also staying adherent to their medications in a really compliant and consistent user experience way. Instead of a patient having to call 3 different 1-800 numbers to enroll into copay and enroll into support and get more information about their condition, they can look to Redi to get all of those things serviced for them in one consistent experience. And if they happen to be on a couple of different meds that Redi's partnered with, that experience is the exact same when they switch between programs that Redi offers. So that's the first thing. And the second thing really is just general product offerings. There's so much to healthcare and there's so much that Redi could do. We started with pharma because it's a very nuanced space and a space that we were familiar with, but there's so much that Redi could become when you look at the HCP and the payer and those types of landscapes. So these are areas that we are actively vetting right now. They're actively doing some diligence on our side, and those will translate to new products that we'll offer here in the near future.
Yeah, I mean, Jaimin nailed our philosophy around that. I'll try and give a tactical example of how we put some of that into motion. I think at a startup, you have to think about what's next and in the future, but you can't sacrifice what you have to do today in order to do that. Everything is very short term in the startup mindset. I think, through series even C and D, even if you're a large company, you have to think kind of short term, but you want to make sure that your short term execution doesn't hurt your opportunities as it relates to long term vision. That's really difficult to do, but a good example Jaimin brought up previously, building in a new copay feature within our platform. And we could stand that up short term and just build it and it be for one customer, and that's that. Wipe our hands of it, good to go. Instead, we execute today through the lens of what we need tomorrow. So we asked ourselves, how does the market receive, or how will they receive this broadly? We need to build it today. It takes longer, it takes a little more resources. We need to build it today so the market tomorrow will want to adopt it broadly. And so that's just taking a moment when you're executing in the short term to think about how you can turn this into a long-term benefit for your organization. And it sounds kind of simple, but it's just truly scheduling that buffer in between, truly scheduling it on the calendar in between to say, how do we build this in a way that it is something that is useful, more long-term, or if it's something that doesn't align to the long-term vision of Redi, then maybe we don't spend that time on it. Maybe it truly is a one-off, but you need to do that continued analysis on what you're building in order to make sure that your long-term vision is not interrupted. You don't need to really make sure you're furthering it every single day. Just ensuring that your short-term execution doesn't interrupt ultimately what you want to be will really kind of help preserve the opportunities for that long-term execution when that time comes.
And you guys even have time set aside weekly, right, to discuss the future, where you want to be, kind of vision boarding. How do those conversations usually go?
Yeah, well, we kick off the week together, the 4 founders, every single week. It's the first meeting we all have. I think that's vitally important. Sometimes we're talking about what has to happen that day or that week. Oftentimes we're talking about the more strategic initiatives that come up that we need to really figure out before we bring others in the team into them. We want to make sure that we're putting forth some measure of direction with these really nebulous things that we don't have figured out before we toss them over to people to try and execute on them. I have a meeting with our Chief Strategy Officer, Kyle, who's another co-founder, every Friday. We try and get 90 minutes in. A lot of times we get 60. A lot of times we get 30. So yeah, those of you who've founded companies in the past will understand that breakdown and degradation. But it is important to be talking about the future at all times. It's not important to be executing on it at all times. Like I said, you need to focus on what is now and do that in the most quality way possible, and that should fuel your long-term vision. But it's important that we're all talking about it and that we all make sure that we're aligned, because what Jaimin experiences is very different than what I experience day to day, different than Nate, different than Kyle. And our visions can slowly start to separate, even just a little bit. And even just a slight deviation in that alignment can create downstream some really terrible things. So talking about it, the communication is the simplest way to solve that. I think we do that well just by having time set aside to do it.
All right, fun-ish question. Maybe you guys will think it's fun. So you are, again, multiple years into this process. Redi is growing. What did you wish you knew at the beginning that you know now?
Yeah, I can start. I think first and foremost, and this may sound like a little bit of a silly answer, but don't spread yourself too thin. I mean, every single problem is going to be your problem at the company. But I think, what I've had to learn over the last couple of years is what does Ready need from me today and what will Ready need from me tomorrow. You're going to be in every single Slack channel and you're going to be tagged in every single notification, good or bad. But really, it's how do you process those things in an actionable way that the company needs from you today, and then focusing on what the company will need from you tomorrow. And then second, I think it's being okay with having to steer away from short-term visions. I think at Ready specifically, the biggest opportunities we've had have derived from what initially have felt like large setbacks, right? Builder was one of them. Some of our larger deals on the sales side is another good example of that. But just as a founder, you should be ready to pivot. And a pivot doesn't necessarily mean a brand new product or a brand new strategy. A pivot could mean just ripping out the sprint plan that you had and starting from scratch, or ripping up this feature that's been in development for a few weeks because the market needs you to react to something a little bit different. I think it's very okay as founders, especially as early stage founders, to be okay with the concept of a small pivot, listening to the team and the market, and then reprioritizing accordingly.
Yeah, it's such a good point, Jaimin, and really similar to what I wish I knew is don't fall in love with your plans for success, because they're going to change a lot. They're going to fail, almost guaranteed. So fall in love with that outcome you want or the impact that you want to have. But the plan on how to get there, it's not even going to look remotely similar. Or maybe it will. I hope it does for anybody who's looking to start a company here. But in my experience, and at Cover My Meds, it just didn't. It just kind of, it all falls apart, and you're like, wow, I had this all figured out, and now it looks really bad. And then it's just interesting, the resiliency and the people that you bring into the organization, those are good opportunities to end up building back in a better way. Because it fell apart because the market told you the truth on the plan, that it's not going to work. And you needed a new plan. And so the faster that happens and the faster you build it back, the better. So keep your plans fluid. Have a good execution pathway, but do not fall in love with this grand idea of how you're going to get to the outcome. Keep the outcome as the North Star and stay open to those pivots that Jaimin was talking about.
I like that, and it's somewhat related to a theme that you guys brought up, which was you are not going to have the answers for everything, and just being comfortable with that and trying to keep the momentum moving forward.
Yeah, I think that goes back to a lot of the questions, like how our roles have changed too. We just don't have the answers for everything, and that's okay to admit when you don't. I mean, a lot of times it's on you to go get the answer, so you still need to do the work to find it. But you don't need to solve everything right now. There are things you have to solve today, but like Jaimin said, like what does the organization need from me tomorrow? There are problems that you're going to encounter that you need to solve tomorrow, and it's really important that you don't focus energy on those. You make sure you focus on the things that need to be solved today. So.
Yeah, it's totally fine to have your assumptions be thrown out the window because it was completely wrong. What's not fine is dwelling on them or spending an insane amount of time trying to prove yourself right. I think once you know you're wrong and once you know a decision you made was not correct, go ahead and figure out how to make it better. Go ahead and reprioritize sprints, reprioritize people's roles and responsibilities, reprioritize your own roles and responsibilities to go ahead and get it done. I think, if you noodle on why you failed, you're never going to actually find the success that you want to.
Love it. Well, thank you guys so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I think we can open it up for questions from the audience if anyone has anything. Got this gentleman in the back here.
A lot of problems I create. So my question is, as you guys talk about being in all the Slack channels, can you guys talk about how you developed your leadership styles and kind of the pivotal moments that made you go, oh, okay, like this is how I changed into the CTO that I needed to be rather than being in it, or like as a CEO, like, hey, how did I stay out above the weeds, or some of those moments?
Yeah, this was and continues to be in some aspects super uncomfortable for me because early on, Luke, Nate, Kyle, and I tended to have the answers to everything, right? Whether it was product related, strategy, sales, vision, et cetera. I think as we've grown, it's putting the people that you've brought on, putting the people that you've entrusted to move the business forward, having them figure out those answers on their own. So, that Slack channel example, it's Jaimin has this answer, we need to get it from him, and he may be the only one at the company that can make this decision. I think over the last year and a half, we've really kind of moved away from that, where those individuals that we've brought on in certain capacities and certain roles are now responsible for making those super uncomfortable, super big decisions that, will take the company in a certain way. And us as founders just have to get comfortable with that. That's the only way that we're going to scale. It's the only way that we're going to not have to be in the weeds so much or having to drive every ounce of direction that the company needs. It's just getting comfortable with the fact that you may be the only one that has this answer, but entrust your team to go ahead and pursue that on their own.
Yeah, for me, from a leadership style perspective, I had some leadership experience at Cover My Meds, and that was, I think, helpful for some of the people management aspects of what I was doing. But, in all honesty, one of the difficult things for me was that when you start an organization and you're CEO, like everything is very flat. If there's 8 people at your org, like CEO and engineer, they're not that far apart because you're all basically just individual contributors. And then as things grow, there's like the separation that occurs not on a personal level, but the organization itself needs separation between CEO and certain roles from like a title perspective. And so, at the founding level too, that was really, really tough to put into place. Like, okay, there's CTO, our Chief Revenue Officer, Nate, and then Chief Strategy Officer, Kyle. They report into me. What does that look like as the organization scales? Well, I mean, Nate, Luke, Kyle, Jaimin, we're all kind of the same. But sometimes the organization requires some different levels of really just corporate governance as to how you make decisions and what gets approved and who's handling the management of what business units. Jaimin can't manage sales or really contribute to it in the same way that he used to. So that really should come on to me to start doing that, but then give the feedback back to Jaimin. That's really tough because it changes dramatically as the organization continues to grow. So I think I got lucky in a lot of ways. Nate, Kyle, Jaimin have actually sat me down on different occasions and been like, way too in the weeds over here, Luke. Not even close into in the weeds over here, and we need you to change that. That feedback is enormously helpful. So whereas previously I think we did everything kind of all the same, organization was very flat, we've become, at least at the leadership level, like just a vicious feedback engine where we are constantly telling one another where we need to shift based off of the very quickly moving and variable aspects of our organization, and then kind of respecting when the organization needs to behave in more of a hierarchy and when it needs to stay flat.
Any other questions? Close to your mouth, please.
Sure. Thank you for this very valuable information. I just want to ask this question. We talked about the fact that part of the product was determined by maybe the demand, from the pharmaceutical companies and all that. I just want to find out between value that is being created, and with regards to the market demand, what really informs you growth aspect, right? Going forward, do you look at the demand from the market perspective that helps you to fine-tune part of the product, or you look at the value that is being created? I'm keen to understand that because I'm also building something in the health space, and I know how health space can be, very tricky, especially with demand from the market as against the value. So what really defines your growth channel?
Yeah, definitely. I think a large part of the answer to that question depends on your business model and the industry that you're serving. For us, right, a large part of our growth metrics and a large part of the value that we deliver to our clients are increased fills or more patients that have been enrolled into support, right? Very, very easy, very, very black and white to quantify, very, very easy to track whether it came from a Redi channel or another channel. But more philosophically, I think a large part of our products depend on patient interviews and specifically UX research to help us inform what we should build next, what we should focus on next, but more importantly, what we should fix, right? Early on, you're going to be designing things in Figma. You're going to be the sole product designer or the sole engineer coming up with a certain assumption or a certain solution. That should fundamentally change as you get patients or users on your platform, and then you let those users, those patients, those individuals actually inform what you should build next, what you should focus on next, and what's going to drive the most value. And then from a client perspective, you take that UX research, you take the findings from your own individual interviews, and you let that translate to a more fundamental client strategy, a more cohesive go-to-market strategy for your clients, which then ensures trust between the client and the vendor or the service that you're providing.
Just to add, the market will tell you the value they want created. They're not going to tell you how to create it, though. And so I think in a lot of cases, there really shouldn't be very little detachment between what the market wants and the value that you need to create. So if somebody says, I really need my patients to have a more affordable experience on my medication, they're telling you right now, like, the value you can create is by making my experience more affordable for my patients. You get to decide the best way to create that value. So how in tune you are with the market lets you know what needs to be made. And so I think we listen to the market all the time in what we design in our product. But your own expertise in the market determines how much value you're going to bring. And those two things should always be very well connected.
Thank you for sharing these amazing insights. I do have a couple of questions. The first thing is, how do you deal with any conflicts that you have between your co-founders or with the engineering team in day-to-day thing? The second question, a bit on the financials. What's the major spending that you have in which area, and how do you decide on the pricing right now as you are in the early stage? Is it different with different clients, or is it value-based, or is it cost-plus based? How do you decide your pricing on it? Yeah.
Yeah, good questions. Just to repeat them back so I know, it's conflicts among co-founders and then specifically engineering teams, and then how do we determine pricing in order to, or what are big spends, and then how do we determine pricing? Is that right? Okay. I'll start with co-founders, because again, this happens to me all the time. My co-founders sit me down and tell me when I'm not doing a good job. That's a really good thing, and you should always have that level of openness. If I said back, like, no, you guys are wrong, I'm doing a great job, I am doing an even worse job if I do that. So when there's conflicts amongst the co-founding team, if it's driven by one individual person, you just have a sit down and you talk about whether this is something that's personal to that person or whether it's something they truly believe is the need of the business against what the other three believe. It's one of the benefits of having 4 co-founders. And so that's enormously valuable. I'll let Jaimin take talking about how specifically with engineering teams.
Yeah, I think this is true across any sort of product team, right? It's not just engineering specific, but it's conflicts on what to prioritize next, conflicts on how things should be designed and architected, what packages and repos to use, what open source code to use. Do we build it in-house? Do we go with a third party to accomplish some sort of need? I mean, that's never going to change, but it's fundamentally, do your people, whether it's engineers, product managers, designers, do they respect each other enough to listen to each other, or are they kind of come into a conversation with a preconceived notion and a preconceived opinion that they're not going to let go? If it's the latter, then you have a big cultural problem, and that's like going to be something that you need to work out, right? Just from a team management perspective. But culturally, I think at Redi, we've cultivated an environment where everyone respects each other and everyone's heard, and there's open lines of communication across the board, whether it's from sales to engineering or product over to sales. And like you need to start that day one, right? Like that needs to be instilled day one. So when you have conversations and you have conflicts around, what direction to go engineering wise, if you fundamentally establish the respect and those open lines of communication between those groups, those conversations become exponentially easier. So I think we focus on that since day one, and there are conflicts that pop up every week, every single sprint, but they're resolved in a pretty quick and respectful manner.
Yeah, and then I'll add, so this is actually from the old McKesson days when we were covering my meds after they got bought, but there was a mantra they had which was debate, decide, commit. And they never really, I think they dismantled it within the organization at some point, but I was always like, that's awesome, that sounds great. And so we take that same approach. It's you debate the problem or the conflict, you decide what the path forward is, and then the most important part is you all commit to being behind that, even if somebody still doesn't agree, right? We're looking for alignment, not agreement, really, really important. Shifting over to spend, your organization is going to have very specific spend line items, and the way in which you manage those, that's truly how well you operate your business from a governance perspective. If you're in tech, keep an eye on your AWS bill. That can get out of hand. So I'd maybe offer that. But other than that, right, there's going to be areas that you decide to invest in. Should we invest in marketing, right? Or should we outsource something to a development firm, even if we have something in-house? Those are choices you're going to have to make. I would say that if you haven't really felt a need or you haven't tested some sort of investment yet, don't necessarily make it. Go ahead and test it first. For example, go really small on your marketing and see if it has an impact before you invest a huge amount thinking that it's going to have a big impact. You can figure some of that out. For pricing, this is really interesting. So the simple approach is just test it. So we went in based off of products that we had seen in the past or that were similar to Redi, and we said, this is how much we think it should be. Turns out it was 40% less than what it should have been, but that's okay. You throw a price out there and you get no negotiation back, your price is too low. You keep raising that, customer to customer, and eventually somebody's gonna be like, that's way too expensive. Now you know, then drop the price and give them a discount.
Debate, decide, commit. I like that. We have time for one more question.
Sorry, I have two questions, but hopefully they're quick. So and you mentioned in the last conversation, but can you talk about your philosophy when you choose to hire somebody and bring in work internally versus outsourcing it or hiring contractors? And the second question is more just on a market perspective. You mentioned that patients, when they need to do refills at pharmacies, are you also working with patients who, or plans where they have more advanced therapies where you require infusion, where you require apheresis? It's a lot more challenges, a lot more difficult, but similar in that there's just too many questions for patients to answer on their own.
So in terms of hiring versus outsourcing, I'm a fundamental believer in hiring FTEs, specifically hiring very experienced individuals that could potentially do the job of 2 or 3 folks that may not be as experienced. So at Redi, we just have FTEs at Redi. And to Luke's point about not growing at all costs, I mean, you don't want to throw people at a problem. You want to understand, is it an actual problem that requires an individual to actually fill that gap. So in terms of scaling a solution, it's not as simple as throwing 10 more engineers at a problem. It's is there a third-party solution that we can leverage that could offset the cost of an FTE, or is this really a people problem that we need to actually hire for? So it's having those kinds of conversations and having that mentality where you don't focus on hiring as the first solution, but really understanding what that problem is and what that solution requires you to do. So at Redi, we only have FTEs, and that's probably going to be the strategy going forward.
So your question about the complexity of a product. When we set out to do Redi, what we really wanted to focus on were the pathways of patients to get support. And people ask all the time, it's a very fair question, but I think, frankly, it's an immature question for what we're trying to build in the market, which is, what therapeutic areas is this best for? Well, that's really missing the point. The point of Redi is that we create a better way to get in touch with support for medications. If a brand is high cost, if it's complex, the manufacturer is standing up support to help patients start and stay on that medication. Think of it like investing upfront in the patient so long-term they can stay on the med, which obviously means the manufacturer gets a large return if they continue to fill compliantly. And so that means that those pathways, manufacturer to manufacturer, while the needs are different per patient, the ways in which they deliver support all equally suck. And so we can step in to make that all equally get better, regardless of the medication. How we do that, to the answer to the market question earlier, how we do that needs to change from product to product. So for a retail product you could pick up at a CVS, that's primarily just getting to the patient as quickly as possible when they experience a problem, because they're just ready to abandon it or go ask their doctor for a generic or something. That's a very different need, but the way in which we execute it is very important. For a complex infusion product, just for reference, our portfolio is about 50-50. It's 50% medications you could pick up at a retail pharmacy. It's 50% super high-cost therapies that cost over $100,000 per year per patient. Those types of products, the patient has one option. They're likely on a variety of other therapies. The complexity of getting on that therapy is enormous. So what we need to build into our product are better pathways for the administrative processes of the tests that the patient needs to receive, the communication with the nurse counselor that's actually walking them through that process, understanding their own data so they can have a better conversation with their healthcare provider at the mandatory check-in every 6 weeks, right? What do they need to do to get ready for an infusion as opposed to just popping the pill with a glass of water? It's very, very different. But what we're doing is just creating a better pathway to that support to let the experts who administer the support actually get in touch with the patient. So it's really just understanding the patient journey for each individual product, and that comes down to having a really good clinical team with good expertise.
Well, thank you guys so much. Well, one, thank you for the questions, but thank you for taking the time this morning. I feel like this has been a long time coming. I'm excited that you were able to do the founder story, and thanks to everyone watching online, and thank you all for coming this morning. This was very fun, and I learned a lot.